Senator Mark Kelly facing a possible court-martial. Meanwhile, the DOJ indictments against Jim Comey and Tish James have been tossed out, the latest act of left-wing judicial activism in the lower courts. Marjorie Taylor Green announced over the weekend that she is resigning from Congress. What does that mean for the state of MAGA and for the Trump coalition more generally? Meanwhile, it looks like we might have a peace deal in the offing between Russia and Ukraine. And finally, Sean Duffy with some interesting advice when it comes to Thanksgiving travel. I'll give you my hot take on that. All of that and more on today's episode of The Josh Hammer Show. Sabotage. That's the one word that comes to mind when you think about Donald Trump's presidency thus far. Certainly it applied from soup to nuts in his first presidential term. No matter where you looked, whether it was subversive, hostile Republicans in the Republican establishment in both houses of Congress, whether or not it was the judicial activists who were slapping so-called nationwide injunctions at a historically unprecedented pace, whether it was the Mueller probe that gulped up more than half of the first presidency and all that Russiagate entailed more generally, whether it was the big tech, censorious oligarchs, and on and on and on. They sabotaged Trump's first term. Unfortunately, we are seeing many of these same actors reprising their role here in the second Trump term. At this point, the second Trump term is in jeopardy. It is in jeopardy partially because the American people are saying that they are not happy with the state of the economy. Something that they said very clearly at the exit polls in the elections in New York City, New Jersey, and Virginia 3 weeks ago. But above and beyond concerns about the economy, which is a major, major concern, something that Republicans must hone in like a laser on if they hope to preclude further damage, further down-ballot bloodshed in the midterms next fall, which, God forbid, could actually bring the Trump presidency to an effective halt halfway through. Even holding that aside for a moment, there are all sorts of other signs of sabotage that are rising up to the surface yet again. On the show last week, we talked about this absurd video, incitement to insurrection, we called it, from Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, Senator Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan, and a few other Democratic elected officials, actively calling on members of the military to ignore illegal orders. Now, when pressed point blank, as Alyssa Slotkin was by Martha Raddatz of ABC on the Sunday news show circuit, she was pressed point blank, is there a single illegal order from President Trump that you can actually identify? She said no. She admitted that she could not identify a single one. Rather, she claimed she was offering forward-looking advice. She was offering legal advice. Well, that cuts two ways, doesn't it? Because when you are telling officers of the military who exist in a structural chain of command, a chain of command without which no civilian military can possibly exist, can possibly cohere, can possibly be the world's most effective fighting force, as the U.S. Armed Forces have been for 2.5 centuries. Without that, the military is nothing. It's kaput, zilch, nada. So she's sitting there saying that you should ignore this order, and then when the U.S. senators who are putting out this propaganda are asked to say, well, what can you point to justify this sort of extraordinary behavior? They've got nothing. They've got nothing. Now, Senator Slotkin, Senator Kelly, what they would say in response, and to an extent what they've said in response, is they would say, oh, you want to give advice just in case this situation arises. Here's the problem. The problem is that the United States of America is not a third world dictatorship. This is not even a first world dictatorship. It's not Nazi Germany. No matter how many times Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wants to compare the ICE detention facilities to the concentration camps, no matter how many times Jasmine Crockett and her ilk want to compare ICE to the Gestapo, this isn't Nazi Germany. It is the greatest country in the history of mankind. That's what it is. And as part of that, not only do we have amazing volunteer citizen soldiers, warriors in this country, going back to the founding days of George Washington's guerrilla army and the upset of the millennium toppling the redcoats of the UK. Not only do we have that amazing military, we have amazing military law. We have military tribunals. We have military justice. If you are serving in the armed forces and you object on legal grounds, you think that your commanding officer is issuing an illegal order, there are well-established procedures that are inherent, that are within the American military system. They're not exogenous to it. They're endogenous. They are part of the military code. You present your case before a military tribunal, and the judge will consider it, look at the law, etc. That is how it works in a first world military. But the news yesterday is that the U.S. Department of War under Secretary Pete Hegseth is not messing around. An amazing statement put out yesterday morning from the U.S. Department of War. Quote, the Department of War has received serious allegations of misconduct against Captain Mark Kelly, U.S. Navy retired. In accordance with the Uniform Code of Military Justice, 10 U.S. Code Section 688, and other applicable regulations, a thorough review of these allegations has been initiated to determine further actions, which may include recall to active duty for court-martial proceedings or administrative measures. This matter will be handled in compliance with military law, ensuring due process and impartiality. Well, frankly, Captain Mark Kelly, that is exactly how this whole situation should have been handled in the first place. Again, within the confines of military law, ensuring due process and impartiality. Why? Because we have a first world country and we have a first world military, gosh darn it, and we have well-established tribunals that are capable of doing and hearing these sorts of cases. For what it's worth, here was Mark Kelly on MSNBC or MS Now, whatever the heck we're calling this addle-brained left-wing cable news channel these days. But here, go ahead and look at Mark Kelly attempting to defend himself from the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, saying that the Pentagon is indeed looking into possibly court-martialing Senator Kelly.
Rachel, I've had a missile blow up next to my airplane. I've been shot down, nearly shot down multiple times. I've flown a rocket ship into space 4 times, built by the lowest bidder. And my wife, Gabby Giffords, meeting with her constituents, shot in the head. 6 people killed around her. A horrific thing. She spent 6 months in the hospital. We know what political violence is, and we know what causes it, too. You know, the statements that Donald Trump made is insightful, incites others. He's got millions of supporters. People listen to what he says more so than anybody else in the country.
All right, so Senator Kelly saying that he's not going to be intimidated, that he's going to pursue the case at hand there. Look, is this literally treason? Is Donald Trump technically correct that this is treason, this is seditious conspiracy? I don't particularly mind if the Pam Bondi DOJ wants to potentially initiate legal proceedings on some very, very, very high charges there just to try to make a point. I'm not entirely convinced that is the proper course of action. This is political rhetoric. It is not necessarily legal rhetoric. However, this is extraordinary behavior. And even if the remedy is not a literal prosecution for seditious conspiracy or anything like that, the remedy very well could be a court-martial, the likes of which the Hegseth Department of War is currently looking. More generally speaking, when you have sordid underlying conduct like this, what you ought to think about, and as a lawyer, what I definitely think about is, okay, you have terrible conduct. What is the possible remedy? Now, Donald Trump, as Donald Trump does, says that the remedy for this is that this is a treasonous crime punishable by death. Okay, maybe not. I don't think that is necessarily a good political move, frankly, if nothing else, to literally call for death of your political opponents. The left has been doing that far too frequently, frankly, when it comes to this assassination porn and this assassination fetish that they've had when it comes to calling for the heads of Donald Trump and others. I am not convinced that it has redounded to their political benefit, and I would caution Republicans against going down that particular rabbit hole. The possible remedy for someone like a Senator Kelly, like a Senator Slotkin, is essentially as follows. What really should happen is that there should be a vote. There should be a vote in the United States Senate to try to expel them from the Senate for nothing less than desecrating the United States Senate, what was once known as the world's greatest deliberative body. And here they are actively fomenting and calling for an insurrection within the United States military. That is shameful. That is desecratory, blasphemous conduct at the United States Senate level. So if I were advising Majority Leader John Thune, what I would say is that that motion should already start to be in the process, if it is not already. That is ideally the check when it comes to this current situation. There's also, of course, the remedy of the ballot box. You can vote these bums out of office. At a bare minimum, what we should all remember is that these so-called moderates, whether they are Mark Kelly of Arizona, whether they are Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan, they are not moderates. Okay, the notion of a so-called moderate Democrat these days is essentially an oxymoron. There are too far and few between examples to count. John Fetterman is maybe one. He's not really as moderate as he actually, as you may think he is, but okay, he occasionally shows signs of independent thinking. Whoop-de-freaking-do. I mean, I guess that's what makes you a moderate Democrat these days. Kelly or Slotkin, no such luck. So at a bare minimum, let's forever dispense with the notion that these two individuals are particularly moderate. and other elements of sabotage, of anti-Trump administration sabotage, we have to go back and talk about the judicial insurrection yet again. We've done this numerous times on our show over the past month and a half or so. We did a deep dive in the history of judicial supremacy in America. We had on my Article 3 Project colleague Mike Davis for an update on the current status of judicial insurrection and lawfare. But the judicial insurrection has struck again. This just happened yesterday. This happened on Monday, November 24th. It happened in the Eastern District of Virginia, which is the particular legal jurisdiction where the Pam Bondi DOJ has brought the prosecutions, the indictments against both former FBI Director James Comey for brazenly lying to Congress 4 years ago within the statute of limitations when it comes to the origins of the Russiagate hoax, and as well the prosecution from the DOJ against Tish James, against the hapless New York State Attorney General for engaging, it seems to me, based on pretty overwhelming evidence, based on what I've seen, on mortgage fraud and bank fraud charges. So a judge yesterday, Judge Cameron McGowan Curry, dismissed both of these indictments, both of them, in one fell swoop, one swoop of a pen. Judge Curry, you might be interested to know, is a Clinton nominee going back to the 1990s and took senior status during the Obama administration. So Judge Curry appears, much as the magistrate judge was in the previous procedural motions in this particular litigation with Comey, much as that magistrate judge was, so is this Article 3 judge, Curry, is a left-wing hack. Now, here is the legal dispute. The order yesterday, the dismissal of both these indictments, actually has nothing to do with the legal merits. So this order has nothing whatsoever to do with the substantive charge of perjury against Comey or the substantive charges of mortgage fraud and bank fraud against Tish James. Rather, what the judge ruled and why she was able purportedly to essentially boot both of these indictments with one fell swoop of a pen, it was done on purely procedural grounds. And as a side note, before getting into the legal debate over the procedural grounds, let me just note this. Grand jury indictments virtually always stick. To have an indictment tossed out is an extraordinary move. This is not something you see every day. So we're having it happen twice in one day, again, for the same ostensible reason, in two very highly charged, very, very politically salient, shall we say, cases. That is not common at all. What I'm trying to say is you better have a darn good reason to do it if you're going to do it. And suffice to say, I'm not sure that this exists in this case. The relevant statute and the relevant legal situation is essentially as follows. The Trump administration has been stymied every which way, speaking of sabotage yet again, by Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and the Senate Democratic Caucus. They have refused to greenlight any number of Trump nominees, essentially up and down all of the president's agenda. Among the areas they have been most active in thwarting has been the appointment of U.S. attorneys. U.S. attorneys. That's how you've had the legal debate surrounding the appointment of Alina Habba, the Trump attorney in New Jersey. And it's why, for present purposes, bring us back to Comey and Tish James, why in the Commonwealth of Virginia, you've had this ongoing similar spat over the legality of the interim appointment of Lindsay Halligan, the acting U.S. attorney in Virginia. Effectively, the way it goes is this. No one disputes that the Attorney General has the ability to make an interim 120-day appointment of a U.S. attorney. The debate is what happens after those 120 days are over. And that takes us to the actual legal statute at question here, which is 28 U.S. Code Section 546. So bear with me for a moment while I try to explain to you what is actually going on here. My colleague at the Article 3 Project, Will Chamberlain, had a really neat thread on X yesterday, really kind of breaking this all down. And here's what Will actually said. He said, the provision authorizing Attorney General Bondi to appoint Lindsay Halligan to a 120-day term as interim U.S. attorney is subsection A of this statute. In subsection A, the grant of authority is broad. That is to say, the Attorney General can make this interim appointment of U.S. attorney if, quote, the district in which the U.S. attorney office is vacant. Okay, so it's vacant, so she can do it. There's one exception. There's only one exception to that, which is laid out in the next subsection, subsection B of the same statute. That subsection basically prohibits the Attorney General, in this case Pam Bondi, from appointing an interim U.S. attorney for someone who has been already voted down by the Senate. But that doesn't apply here. It's inapplicable because the Senate, by definition, hasn't voted on Lindsay Halligan, the U.S. attorney. If they had, she would have been confirmed. Because maybe John Thune's not the most impressive majority leader in the history of the U.S. Senate, but he can definitely whip the votes in a 53-47 majority to get a U.S. attorney confirmed. That's for sure. So by definition, subsection B, the statute doesn't apply. That takes us back to subsection A. Well, ludicrously, the judge then goes further down the statute to a totally separate subsection, subsection D, and says this: if the appointment expires, the district court may appoint a U.S. attorney to serve until the vacancy is filled. And the court then takes that language, may fill, and says, yesterday, Judge Curry says, this is actually the same thing as shall fill. So what the judge does, it's a very not so subtle sleight of hand here. They're taking a discretionary ability from a district court to say the district court may fill his appointment if the U.S. Senate has not done its job. And then it reads that as not concurrent shared authority between the court and the attorney general, but it is disingenuously reading it as exclusive authority. The district court shall make an appointment, not may make an appointment. But that's not the wording of the law. And it's not the wording of the law for a very good reason. But at the district court, it seems clearly to me, based on the meaning and the plain language of this statute, the district court shares authority in this situation with the attorney general. That's to say, if the attorney general had not indicated that in this case Lindsay Halligan would continue as the acting U.S. attorney, if she hadn't done that, then the district court could step in. But guess what? She did. The DOJ made very clear they still wanted Lindsay Halligan after the 120-day expiration period. They still wanted her in this role. So this subsection D that the judge, Curry, is talking about here doesn't apply. It literally does not apply. So it's just garbage judging. It is garbage activist judging. It is activist judging because this is a judge, again, Clinton nominee, took senior status during Obama, left-wing to her core. This is a judge who knows the conclusions she wants to reach and is going to do whatever she possibly can to twist and distort the law to get there. That is the sine qua non of activist lower court judging, and that is exactly what happened in this particular case. It's really obvious when you start to dig a little deeper there. So, for example, on page 11 of this order yesterday, what the judge is saying is that the district court and only the district court may appoint the U.S. attorney. But again, that's not what it says. You are reading into the law, Your Honor. It's garbage. And frankly, it's not going to stand. On Monday, after this order came down, White House Press Secretary Karen Leavitt was sharing President Trump's reaction to the news of the dismissal. Go ahead and watch that.
His reaction was, we've seen this before. We've seen partisan judges take unprecedented steps to try to intervene in accountability before, but we're not going to give up. And I know that the Department of Justice intends to appeal these rulings very soon if they haven't already.
Okay, and Pam Bondi saying the exact same thing yesterday when she was asked as well. I think the DOJ has the better of the argument. So this case is happening, both these cases, the Comey and the Tish James indictments, the Comey indictment for perjury before Congress about the origins of Russiagate, the Tish James indictment for mortgage and bank fraud. Both these indictments are happening in the Eastern District of Virginia. Virginia appeals to the Fourth Circuit. The U.S. Court appeals for the Fourth Circuit, not one of the more conservative constitutionalist appellate courts in the country, if we are being brutally honest. The Fourth Circuit was a court that Barack Obama did a number on by appointing a lot of left-wing activist judges. The first Trump administration did appoint a number of judges trying to take it back towards sanity, but unlike the Fifth Circuit or the Eighth Circuit, it is not a truly constitutionalist court. It will depend on the nature of the three-judge panel. And that's basically what it boils down to there. But I guess I will say this. There are a lot of would-be legal eagles out there. I've seen them on cable news. I've seen them on my social media feed that are dismissing these indictments out of hand. They're saying, oh my God, Pam Bondi should be fired for incompetence. What is she doing with this Lindsay Halligan situation there? How could he possibly bring these indictments? Give me a break. The plain letter reading of the law is on the DOJ side when it comes to the actual procedural question of whether the acting U.S. attorney, Lindsay Halligan, is there in a permissible fashion under the statute. The good faith, plain reading of the law is on the DOJ side. Moreover, based on what I saw of James Comey's testimony a few years ago within the 5-year statute of limitations for perjury, when he was asked about Russiagate, he seems to have clearly lied about the role played by the infamous January 2017 intelligence community assessment. That's the assessment that involved the so-called P-tape and the Steele dossier and all that. Comey lied to Congress about the role played by the Steele dossier, P-tape, and all that horrific rushed assessment in launching Crossfire Hurricane, the FBI probe that ultimately leads to the Mueller probe that swallows up 2+ years of the Trump presidency. Comey lied, and he should be prosecuted. The DOJ is doing a correct thing there when it comes to Comey. Tish James, based on all I can tell, there is a very, very, very credible case we made that she committed mortgage fraud. And frankly, a very similar way to Lisa Cook, the Federal Reserve Board of Governors governor, who listed as her principal place of residence multiple places in both Georgia and Michigan. But yet again here, when it comes to the judicial insurrection, we see that there is just a massive attempt at sabotage. And this particular one really grinds my gears, especially as a lawyer, because this has been happening over and over and over and over again. It's such nonsense. I look forward to the DOJ's appeal post-haste there in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. Another form of sabotage that has been happening against the Trump administration of late is a form of sabotage within the henhouse, so to speak. We've talked about it numerous times on our show. This is a form of sabotage that comes from would-be allies, ostensible, purported friends of the administration, people who hold themselves out as being on your side and having your best interests. And they claim to support MAGA. They claim to support the conservative movement. They claim to support America and Western civilization, for that matter. But increasingly, many of them, it seems, are not doing so. Well, one of those would-be ostensible allies was Marjorie Taylor Green. We've spoken about Marjorie numerous times recently on our show. Marjorie Taylor Green, you may recall, had the chutzpah to come out and say that yours truly, that I called, this is what Marjorie Taylor Green said, she said that Josh Hammer called for the assassination of Tucker Carlson. Why? Because I wrote an op-ed for the Daily Mail, the British newspaper, about a month ago now, after the Tucker and Nick Fuentes interview. And speaking of the threat posed by Tucker and his ilk to the conservative cause, I said the fox is in the henhouse, and until the fox is neutralized, then we are all at risk. What I obviously meant is that Tucker and what he represents is a massive threat to the conservative movement and, by extension, to America. But Marjorie Taylor Green, as an sitting member, an active sitting member of Congress, willfully distorted and weaponized to suit her narrative to say that Josh Hammer called for the assassination of Tucker Carlson. The chutzpah to do that. Disgraceful, loathsome, disgusting. But after all, what would you expect from an adulteress, someone who got divorced after she cheated on her husband, someone who has made millions of dollars mysteriously when it comes to stock trading, securities trading over the time of her career in Congress? So she's either the next Warren Buffett or there's, shall we say, something a little there. How else to interpret Marjorie Taylor Green? Just grifting for the moment. Someone who has become increasingly unhinged when it comes to her aggressive opposition to Donald Trump and his presidency. Something that you see in many of the Marjorie Taylor Green allies out there when it comes to Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, people like that. The news of the weekend, this past weekend, that we have not touched on yet here on the show, is that Marjorie Taylor Green announced that she is resigning from Congress. To which I say, hallelujah. Hallelujah. Good freaking riddance to Marjorie Taylor Green. She did so in a 4-page letter. And here is Marjorie Taylor Green, in her own words, reminding everyone why she went to Washington in the first place. I guess we'll watch a little bit of this clip.
My only goal and desire has ever been to hold the Republican Party accountable for the promises it makes to the American people and put America first. And I have fought against Democrats' damaging policies like the Green New Deal, wide open, deadly, unsafe border policies, and the trans agenda on children and against women. With that has brought years of non-stop, never-ending personal attacks, death threats, lawfare, ridiculous slander and lies about me that most people could never withstand even for a single day. It has been unfair and wrong, not only to me, but especially to my family, but it's been wrong to my district as well. I have too much self-respect and dignity. I love my family way too much, And I do not want my sweet district to have to endure a hurtful and hateful primary against.
So Marjorie Taylor Green, they're talking about how she is the victim. Cry for me. Talking about how this whole situation, this whole fight with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump calling her a traitor, puts her in harm's way. As if she is now in harm's way. Well, maybe, just maybe, Congresswoman, you should have thought of that before you put me and my family in harm's way. By lying through your godforsaken teeth that I somehow called for the assassination of someone, which I did not. I abhor political violence with every fiber of my being. My friend Charlie Kirk was assassinated before the whole world. They arrested someone in Texas a little over a month ago for making online death threats against me, Carol Markowitz, Seth Dillon, and Laura Loomer. I have zero appetite for this treating frivolously of political violence. It is a cancer and will destroy this republic unless it is toned down a lot. Toned down to the point that is of non-existence. Marjorie Taylor Green always playing the victim. It's always about Marjorie Taylor Green. Saying there that she went to Washington to accomplish the best things. Again, as if we don't notice that she mysteriously made tens of millions of dollars in stock trading. As if we don't notice that her announced resignation date of this coming January 5th, so January 5th, 2026, is mysteriously, oh wow, I guess you didn't think we noticed that, you little dimwit. It is mysteriously just 2 days after her federal pension vests. It's 2 days after the 5-year service threshold that is required for lawmakers to qualify for a lifetime pension under the federal rules. What, you didn't think that we would notice that one? Unbelievable. But Marjorie Taylor Green, this isn't necessarily just about Marjorie Taylor Green. This is about the idiot caucus, the crazy caucus, more generally speaking. They are absolutely a sabotage, subversive threat, to stick with our theme of the day. Whether it's Marjorie Taylor Green on the inside, whether it's folks like Tucker and Candace on the outside, there are actors right now that are seeking to destroy MAGA and the Trump presidency while having the chutzpah, the temerity, to call themselves allies, looking out for the interests of their friend President Trump, of the movement more generally. So the way that they attempt to square the circle is they try to say that, oh, I actually support President Trump, but I think that he's just way off the base on this, he's way off on that, he's way off of this, blah, blah, blah. I hate what he's doing on Russia, I hate what he's doing in the Middle East, I hate what he's doing on Epstein, but oh yeah, don't worry, I support Donald Trump. I think he's great. I'm MAGA, look at me. I'm sorry, what? At a time where the political left is literally assassinating people, again, Charlie Kirk, when they are literally engaging in, or they're attempting to foment insurrection in the military, where the shock troops of the Democratic Party and the leftist establishment, the shock troops in the form of Black Lives Matter, Antifa, the pro-Hamas jihadi crew, are terrorizing America's streets, at a time where Minneapolis, Minnesota, one of the largest cities in the Midwest, is being taken over by a Somali scam, putting Minnesota taxpayers on the hook for subsidizing Al-Shabaab, the jihadist outfit back in Somalia, where a major Michigan suburb, Dearborn, is naming street signs after Hezbollah, where Sharia supremacists in suburban Dallas-Fort Worth are trying to acquire an entire community and subject it to Sharia law. This is the time, with all the drugs and Nicaragua and all that flowing in as well, the Chinese Communist Party ever on the loose, this is the time, you feckless fools on the so-called right, that you want to try to, on the one hand, say, oh, I'm just looking out for President Trump's best interest, while on the other hand, criticizing him for everything he's doing? What is wrong with you? What in the name is wrong with you? There are a lot of folks on the right these days that are decrying the current level of Republican or conservative infighting. My former colleague, the Daily Wire, Matt Walsh, I see him do this frequently. He's just one example. There's a lot of folks doing this. I obviously agree with that in theory. I would love nothing more than for all of us to focus our attention on the existential civilizational threat that is coming from the activist radical left. Honest to God, I would love nothing more. If you have a problem with that, then you should look at people like Marjorie Taylor Green, who accused Donald Trump of engaging in a massive pedophile global sex trafficking conspiracy ring cover-up, maybe, just maybe, on behalf of a foreign intelligence service. Wink, 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 Mossad. Is that infighting? Or is it only infighting when Team Sanity does it? It's garbage. It's infighting. It has to be, by definition, both ways. And the infighting aggressors right now is coming from Team Crazy. But it's not just the infighting. Do you want to win elections or not? Does the American right still care to win elections? Do you want to be successful? Or are you just consigning yourself to a ruinous down-ballot bloodbath at the midterms next fall, and then, God forbid, potentially a President Gavin Newsom or President AOC come January 2029? Is that what you want? Is that literally what you want? Because you're going to get it. You're going to get it unless you fix the economy, unless you start focusing on the economy, unless you focus on healthcare, things like that, until you find a way to fix all these various levels of sabotages, including but not limited to the judicial insurrection, and maybe above all, until you figure out how to nip this fifth column cancer from within your own ranks and to unify, for God's sake, to focus on the real crisis of the left. Unless until all that happens, I think that Team Right, MAGA, the conservative movement, whatever you want to call it, they are signing themselves up for a highway to hell, to paraphrase the classic AC/DC song. A highway to hell. And then while we're mixing metaphors here, that will then be an extension, by extension, a Hayekian road to serfdom, given the horrors and terrors that are likely to follow after this. So get your freaking you-know-what together. Man, I just, it makes me so upset, as you can clearly tell. This cancer from within the broader right just has to be nipped, guys. It has to be nipped. Anyway, I am optimistic that the resignation of Marjorie Taylor Green does send a positive sign that hyper-conspiratorial, hyper-weaponized infighting, this pro-Russia, pro-Iran, anti-Western civilization, anti-Semitic crap. I am optimistic now that that is a good data point on the slow but necessary path bringing the right back towards a place of intellectual consistency and, frankly, intellectual sanity. In other news, and speaking of sanity, this is very good news. There's been a lot of rumors the past few days of this much ballyhooed 28-point plan. This plan between Russia and Ukraine that the United States has attempted to oversee. And the plan has been teased by Secretary Rubio, by Steve Witkoff, the special envoy, and by various other players as well. Now, there are a lot of folks saying that this is a very quote-unquote pro-Russia plan. There's been a lot of speculation as to how exactly this plan came about there. My reading of the situation is that this is not necessarily a pro-Russia plan unless you are a hardcore, dyed-in-the-wool, Ukraine in your Twitter bio kind of Slava Ukraine fanatic. If you live in the real world, which I do, and presumably you like to live in the real world as well, if you live in the real world, this is a very realistic peace plan. The basic confines of the plan are as follows. Ukraine is going to agree to some very hard territorial concessions. Why? Because they don't control the territory that Russia has taken over. Period, full stop, end of story. They don't. If you want to be the genius out there who wants to show me a viable plan to get Putin and the Russians to just give up on territory that they have mostly held, for the most part, for going on 2.5, 3 years now, or whatever exactly it's been since they started to acquire most of the Donbass there, okay, by all means, go for it. No one has done so yet, so I'm going to assume that you can't do that. So that is all but a foregone conclusion for Team Real World. For those of us who actually live in the real world when it comes to Ukraine making some sorts of painful territorial concessions. Now, furthermore, Ukraine is not going to be allowed to join fully NATO or the European Union. Again, this should be a foregone conclusion. Ukraine should be some sort of buffer zone, some sort of neutrality. The entire notion of this ever-encroaching Western alliance, expanding NATO to the Baltic states, places like Estonia, for instance, and doing so decades after the fall of the Berlin Wall, what was the point of this? Like literally, what was the point other than to poke the bear and just continually antagonize Moscow? There is no point. Now, in exchange for that, and here's the big exchange, Ukraine is going to get some sort of temporary, likely only 10-year, but some sort of undefined, broadly temporary speaking, NATO Article 5 style security guarantee from the United States. As long as that is temporary, that I think is something that I can get behind and that you can probably get behind as well. I am wary if it is a permanent NATO-style alliance. At that point, you might as well just have Ukraine join NATO. But if that's what it takes to end the war, some sort of 10-year guarantee to try to get Russia, which, again, to be clear, is obviously the aggressor in this conflict, to try to get them back in place, if that's what it takes, then that is something that I can probably live with. That's fine. If it's a permanent NATO thing, I think a lot of us will start to ask some questions. The breaking news this morning on Tuesday, November 25th, is that Ukraine has apparently agreed to the broad outlines of this peace deal, which is a really, really big deal because Volodymyr Zelensky was doing media this past weekend after this deal, the broad confines leaked. Zelensky started doing the media rounds talking about how this deal forced us to choose between our integrity and our dignity. He was not a fan, but apparently now he's saying that they have agreed there, or at least a U.S. official who spoke with Zelensky has said that. So a U.S. official telling CBS News on Tuesday that Ukraine's government had agreed to a peace deal brokered by the Trump administration. The Ukrainians have agreed to a peace deal, this unnamed U.S. official told CBS News. There are some minor details to be sorted out, but they have agreed to a peace deal. So again, there's a lot of details left to be filled in here. But if this happens, this is clearly tremendous news when it comes to U.S. security and U.S. national interest in Eastern Europe. A very, very, very troubled part of the world for a very, very, very long time. This war has gone on for far too long. It's gone on for far, far, far too long. This February, God forbid, if the war is still raging, it will have been 4 years. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? The war in Gaza lasted about 2 years. To be clear, there's still some gunfire. Hamas is still firing. The IDF is responding. But more or less 2 years. If the Ukraine war lasts until February, it'll be double that. It'll be 4 years. The body count is insurmountable. It's going to take Ukraine at least a half century, if not longer, to recover, if they ever will recover. When it comes to all the young men who have died, the people who have fled, the plummeting birth rates, the PTSD, the businesses, the capital have all fled. The country is in a state of ruination because of this. Russia is not faring so great either, by the way. So just end this freaking bloody conflict. And if Ukraine is okay with the broad confines of what I just said, then I think that this is going to be okay, frankly, from a U.S. perspective. A lot more still to come on this particular front. We will update you as we learn more here, certainly on the Josh Hammer Show. Finally, in case you've been living under a rock, it's Thanksgiving week. I love Thanksgiving. We're going to have a whole episode tomorrow about the importance of gratitude and the importance of religion, which really is kind of the quintessence of gratitude. We're going to bring on Charles Murray, the well-known conservative public intellectual, to talk about his new book, Taking Religion Seriously. So I really, really look forward to this conversation with Charles Murray. I know that you will enjoy it very much as well. But among the things that Thanksgiving week is, it's my favorite holiday of the year, by the way, but among the other things that Thanksgiving is it's really hectic and at times stressful when it comes to a travel perspective. Well, Sean Duffy, who's the Transportation Secretary, he's really had his hands full when it comes to various aviation messes. There was the tragic crash outside Reagan Airport in Washington, D.C. back in January. There was this horrific crash of the UPS plane outside Louisville, Kentucky. 14 people died. Terrible, terrible stuff. He's had his hands full. Well, Secretary Duffy was at Newark Airport in New Jersey on Monday, just yesterday, and he had some humorous comments, honestly, about the imperative of dressing a little better when flying. Let's go ahead and listen to Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy.
And as you might not be able to find a seat as you're by your gate because of the number of flights that are going out or coming in. But I think we have to think about how do we do a better job? How do we, maintain maybe some of that frustration we have as we travel this Thanksgiving season? Maybe we should say please and thank you to our pilots and to our flight attendants. I think, again, I call this just maybe dressing with some respect. Whether it's a pair of jeans and a decent shirt, I would encourage people to maybe dress a little better, which encourages us to maybe behave a little better. Let's try not to wear slippers and pajamas as we come to the airport.
Okay, so I couldn't help but just laugh when I saw this. And I left for the reason that, like you, I was born in 1989, so I was already born past the golden era of American aviation. But when more Americans started to fly in, let's call it the good old days, in the 1950s, 1960s, even into the 1970s, we've all seen these old photos of the men dressed up in their suits with the slick back hair. I mean, it's like you were going to like a Broadway show to get onto an airplane there. This is back when you were smoking cigarettes in the airplane cockpit. And, oh, by the way, I can't help but notice that in all these photos that I've seen, it looks like the airline stewardesses are, well, let's say pretty smoking hot. You know, unlike sometimes the case today where you have, all these plus-size diversity hires and things like that there. By the way, the pilots were also, generally capable back then, unlike United Airlines, for instance, today, which has talked about the imperative of hiring diverse pilots. Insane. Hold that for another day. Look, when it comes to dressing at the airport, I very much like, in theory, what the secretary is saying. Having said that, on a personal level, I'm going to be honest with you here, I wear sweatpants and a hoodie. I'm sorry, I do. Why? Because I want to be really comfortable on the plane. I just do. The airport, the whole process, you get there, you check your bag, you go through security, you wait at the gate, you board the plane, you're in a cramped seat, the bathrooms on the airplane are tiny there. You want to be comfortable. Of course, I have flown while wearing suits, while wearing ties, while wearing all that stuff there. I'm not opposed to it. I've done it God knows many times. But if I have my druthers, if I don't have to immediately hop off the plane and go straight to a meeting or something like that there, I'm wearing freaking sweatpants and I'm wearing a hoodie. Now, if that's okay with the secretary, fine. I mean, I'm not literally wearing my pajamas. I'm not literally wearing slippers. I'll wear casual shoes and some sweatpants. If that's okay, then it's okay. But the point stands, which is be nice. Be a good American. I don't like TSA any more than you do. I think that they're a bunch of petty tyrants. But don't yell at them. They're just doing their job. Don't yell at the flight stewardesses. They're just doing their job. And maybe a little more of all of us just respecting one another and doing our job and putting a smile on our face, especially this time of the year, that potentially, I think, could go a very, very long way. I'm Josh Hammer. Please make sure to subscribe and listen everywhere you get your podcasts. Make sure to watch our show on YouTube if you're not already doing so. Otherwise, listen to us everywhere on the Salem Podcast Network. Hope you enjoyed today's show. We'll be right back with Charles Murray on tomorrow's episode of The Josh Hammer Show.